Welcome to a CX Moment. In this series, we chat with companies about what's happening with their business, their support centers, and with their customer experience. If you want to catch up on any previous episodes, because this is not the first one we've done, check out our Zendesk YouTube channel and you can find our conversations with Slack, Box, and others. I'm Sarah Reed from Zendesk, and today we're joined by Patrick Vincent from Xavier College. This CX Moment is pretty special because it's the first that we've broadcast from Australia. I'm going to let you know that this 30 minutes goes by really fast, and we want you to ask all of your questions. So put your questions in the Q&A and we'll do our best to answer them all. You'll also see a short poll about 5 minutes before the program ends. Please take a minute and share your feedback. We do pay attention and we appreciate you all. So let's go ahead and get started. Hey Patrick, how are you today?
I am very well, Sarah, thank you.
Good, and it's so great to talk to you. My dogs are barking in the background, if you hear that. And that's part of the charm of us all working from home, right?
That's exactly right.
Or in your office, which I understand you are in your office at Xavier for the first time in how many weeks?
First time in 2 weeks. So it's probably the first time I've been so excited to come to the office in a few years, and it's quite surreal given we're in quite a lockdown situation in Melbourne at the moment.
You are, and we'll get to that probably a little bit later. But what I just want to say, what I love so much about the Xavier College story is that it transcends geography. It doesn't matter where you're located. You can be located here in the States where I am, where you are in Melbourne, anywhere in the world. It doesn't matter, if you are in education, if you have a child in education, or you care about education. This is so relevant. It seems like all we see on TV these days is, are schools going to open? And if they are going to open, what is that experience going to be like? So with that, let's back up a little bit. Let's go back. Let's go way back. You joined Xavier College, what, 15 months ago?
Yeah, about 15 months ago. And it's my first time working in the education sector. So I'm from a government and defence background within Australia and overseas. And so this is completely new to me. And what I thought really interesting coming into education was the fact that, as you said, the sector seems to have these things that are universal internationally about it. And so many of those things are, the sense of community that every school and organisation has, the passion the staff have, the focused on, I guess, customer experience and customer success in both the forms of students and parents. I've never experienced a sector where that's so strong before. And one of the other things I experienced was the fact that education technology is such a niche area as well. So that was quite interesting for me, coming in and having a new culture, a new way of working, and a whole new technology stack to be working with.
And when you came on board at Xavier, you had some fortuitous forethought on some things that you wanted to change that are incredibly fortunate right now. But what were a few of those things that you were like, we really just have to do this?
So the big ticket items for us for the last 15 months have really been around enabling remote working and online learning. And it was nothing to do with any forethought about global pandemics or the school shutting down. It was simply the fact that we weren't leveraging cloud technologies. We had a really traditional on-premises approach to our infrastructure and our software. And we had a culture where face-to-face engagement was the norm and also really valued. So we have a number of campuses across Melbourne, and they're quite geographically dispersed. And we were finding that staff would rather travel 30 or 40 minutes to go to a meeting across town, rather than using video conferencing or a telephone call to be able to get that interpersonal exchange and experience. And that was something that I, coming from a more of a globalized sector, I thought was really interesting and I'd not experienced before. But it's something I thought we can get some real efficiencies here. We can probably increase collaboration by enabling people to have that online and virtual engagement. And by going through a cloud migration, which was a huge focus the past 12 months in particular, We were building our resilience as an organization for disaster recovery and business continuity. We were bringing in efficiencies in cost and in our infrastructure management. And it all kind of just made sense at the time for a whole raft of other reasons. And then, of course, COVID-19 came around. We had about 48 hours notice in Melbourne that our school was going to be greatly affected. And it was just the fact that we'd spent that 12 months bringing in, unified communications tools and cloud computing that let us pivot really quickly to that online model. And as I said, it wasn't with any real forethought. It was simply seemed like good sense at the time.
But it made sense for different reasons. And you weren't trying to kill the culture of the school, because it sounds like part of what was so important and valuable at the school, though, was those interpersonal relationships. And so how did you mitigate that when you started to actually talk about, oh, hey, you don't have to drive to this other campus. You can do this all over the internet.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So the school is 142 years old. The staff and the students and the parents are really proud of that history and that legacy. And we continue an older way of working in some respects, because not only has it worked, but you're right, it's about that person-to-person engagement, and that's what's so valued here. So for us to be able to change that was really challenging. And the way we approached it was not looking at it and articulating it as change for change's sake, or the fact that there was a new technology available that we thought would have a business impact and create efficiencies. What we ended up doing was trying to understand the culture better and understanding the lexicon and the motivators for people. And then just figuring out how, in fact, we could take what they wanted, like face-to-face engagement, and just enhance that capability for them. And that was something that meant that we spent months and months going around and engaging with people, and we were doing soft launches of new communications technologies, or kind of running systems in parallel. And for instance, some of the things that we started to do was identifying opportunities to let the users find ways to use these new technologies. So instead of us pushing people, for instance, into video teleconferencing, for instance, we started to tell people about the technology and saying, well, actually, when you have, for instance, if you have a boarding student that's stuck up in Sri Lanka or Singapore, or maybe in the Northern Territory of Australia, who just can't come to school for a week or two, maybe they're ill, maybe they've got a parent who's sick and they've had to return home, we can virtualize the classroom experience for them.
Right.
We can broadcast that. You can show the PowerPoint presentations, all of these things that kind of in the business world we take for granted that you can do. And so by saying to them, actually, we're enabling that face-to-face experience to continue in these difficult circumstances, that's the kind of thing that really kicked it off for people, and they started to see we were enhancing what they were already doing.
So it sounds like you actually were enhancing the culture and increasing the empathy, because you were allowing the student to go through whatever tumultuous experience that they might be enduring at that point in time without inhibiting their school. And you were empowering the professors, the faculty, to actually still be able to teach, and not just teach this one student or perhaps two students who might have been remote, but all their students simultaneously. Now, we're going to get to how you got everyone to get on board with that, but I want to carry on a little bit with our timeline here, which is, Australia, Melbourne in particular, has now gone through what, 3 stages of transition with COVID-19? Is that correct?
I think we may be reaching 4 actually. So we escalated quite rapidly to stage 3 here, which was a shutdown of non-essential services, most businesses, schools moving to being remote. We went through a couple of months of that starting in March. Mm-hmm. And so the school was forced into a remote learning model for a number of months. Our number of infections started to drop, and as a result, school was allowed to come back in for a period, and businesses started to open up more. However, we then found that our infections and community transmission started to increase to a concerning level, and so we went into a deeper level of lockdown into stage 4. So now it's really only critical businesses. All schools are operating remote. There's a curfew in place, and an hour of exercise nominated for every person, as long as they're wearing a mask around town to get out of the house. So we've really escalated quite rapidly. And so we've been in that for about a week and a half, and we have 4.5 weeks to go.
And do you have any idea of when students might come back to campus?
So what we're hoping is that once we get out of this period in 4.5 weeks, that we can start to have some number of students coming back to the college, especially our senior students. So these are the ones who are in their last 2 years of schooling before they head off to university and college. And so it's really important for them to get that face-to-face engagement, that really rich learning experience. So we're hoping that at least they can come back. However, we're planning for the eventuality that we may not be back at full capacity until the new school year starts next January.
So let's talk then about, if you're not into full capacity, what does that look like, from because now everything has to be online, right? It's not just the education side of things, it's also all the extracurriculars that have to be online. And what's really important to people like me is your customer service also has to be online. And that's the customer service to the parents, to the students, to the faculty, to anyone else that the school deals with. So how are you enabling all of these disparate people to come together in an online environment?
So there's a couple of programs that we've had. So one of the biggest ones is what we call the Xavier Service Centre. And to look at why we have that and why it's important to our online environment, we have to look at the past. So traditionally, our IT support and service desks have been a physical space at each campus with staff who stand and essentially wait at a counter for customers to come in with their problems. We had no service management platform, we had no ticketing system, we had no online engagement. Really, the primary channel for technical support was, if you've got any problem, whether it's software, hardware, account-based, walk into a service desk, walk up to a person and have a face-to-face engagement, and they will fix it for you on the spot. And that presented huge challenges for us in terms of tracking the workload, managing the customer experience and making that consistent and repeatable. And really importantly, we had no history of customer complaints and issues. So when it came down, for instance, to a piece of hardware, they may have been having the same hardware issue every week for
You'd never know it.
We would never know. They may have seen 6 different staff in that period. And so we had no way to actually track this. And we realized a year ago, I looked and said, look, this is just not sustainable for us. The college was scaling. So we have 2,000 students, about 4,000 parents we deal with, tens of thousands of alumni, and 400 to 800 staff, depending on what season it is. So it's a huge amount of people to be managing their technical services. So one of the things we did was we adopted Zendesk as a service management platform, implemented that over the past 8 months or so. And then what we did was really quickly pivoted from a single face-to-face interpersonal channel for support to saying to people, well, actually, you can't see anyone now. There is no service desk open. The college is closed. Everything's remote. You need to quickly pivot to a ticketing platform, a dedicated service phone number. We've trialed WhatsApp integration, for instance, to really expand that channel. And we're trying to make it as an omni-channel experience for the customer. But to get to that point, we've had to do that really rapidly and completely remodel the way we view that customer experience and journey. And some of the other things we've done is, for instance, we've introduced Microsoft Teams as a unified communications platform. So we use that now across our classes. So we can have purely online classes as well as hybrid classes as well when school's actually in. And that's been hugely powerful for the learning experience. And that's something that we've gone from really a paper-based, a very heavy paper-based culture to one that has embraced online learning and is using that as the primary teaching tool really, really rapidly to build not just the student experience, but also helping parents as well, because we've given all of the parents access to Teams. So we've now managed to do parent-teacher interviews via Teams for the first time. So the parents log in, they have their child sitting with them, and they have a one-on-one engagement with a teacher via video conference, which is a completely new experience for most people.
How has that feedback been? How do parents like it? How do the students really?
They love it. I think there is, because so many of them are really busy people who, especially this year, are dealing with complex situations in their own personal and work life. And so instead of saying to them at 4 o'clock next Tuesday, you must be here for a 10-minute session with a history teacher to talk about your child, we've given them that flexibility to actually say, you can do it from 6 from your home office.
We don't care.
Yeah, you can do it in your pajamas. It's incredibly easy for you, and all your engagement can be online. And that's something we've just never supported before. And people are loving the fact that we've now said you can have a face-to-face engagement on an ongoing basis. But likewise, if you want to engage with the school virtually, we're enabling you to do that. And it's the first time we've done that.
So do you think engagement with parents has actually increased over the last few months?
I think it has, and we're starting to see that feedback trickle through. One of the really important thing that's happened is it's increased the transparency for parents into the classroom. So parents can now see the lessons taking place in their homes. They can support their younger children in the classroom experience and with their work. Instead of being given pieces of paper in class in terms of lecture notes or a quiz that may be occurring, parents actually see those coming through in more real time during the day. And yeah, it's really opened the classroom to the parents to be able to get that visibility and make more of a contribution to their child's learning. And I think that's a really powerful lesson we've learned here, is that the parents have a really important role to play in the classroom.
It is a powerful lesson. And we have a question from someone in the audience, which I think is really important, because they're interested in how you onboard students and parents into your ticketing system and into your processes. Because let's face it, it's really different than being in a commercial sector, in a business sector, where we all just get onboarded and trained together when we join the company. And you don't have that luxury. So how do you get all these parents on board with something like Zendesk?
That is a really good question. We thought it was going to be more challenging than it was. And so we'd had a soft launch of the service center 2-3 months before the lockdown started. And so we kind of had Zendesk floating around, and we'd been referring people to it. And we found that the most important thing it contained was a knowledge base. So using the guide functionality to help people help themselves. And you know, I love that because it really assists with ticket deflection, but from a user perspective, it lets them self-serve a lot more readily. So we found a lot of people were just gravitating towards understanding that there was something sitting there that they could use that would make life a little easier. And they started to experiment a bit more and reach out to it. And so some of the funny experiences we had in those first few months were finding that students were enrolling themselves and starting to build their own guide articles and comment and experiment in all these really interesting ways on a system that we never told them about or launched. And it turns out that, you know, nobody is more inquisitive than a 15 or 16-year-old boy with a laptop running around on their school network. You know, you put something on 24 hours later. You know, even with our mobile device management system, we thought we'll do a launch over 6 months of this. And we found that, you know, tens of boys a week were enrolling their own laptops and mobile phones into mobile device management. So the students were really good about adopting it themselves. With the parents, we simply found that just articulating the benefits to them, telling them it was there. And I think once they had that first really positive experience, that helped to build it, and they kept going back for more and seeing the benefits. And you know, we've done some basic education. We've created some videos to tell people how Zendesk works through that service center model. People love the fact that they get a ticket, and that's typically people's first experience with it. So they'll use a more traditional method. They'll email us, or they'll pick up a phone and say, I've got a problem. And 3 minutes later, they get a ticket sitting there saying your job has been assigned to the following technician. We'll follow up with you. And for the first
And
time,
that feels validating.
that's exactly right. They get visibility. They're no longer sitting there going, I wonder if someone is working on this. They're actually seeing that workflow progress. You know, it's not in this black hole of IT that maybe in a week or two, you'll get an email saying, I did that for you. And so that was really important. And the other thing we did was we just looked completely differently at the way we did customer service. And so instead of taking technical people and service desk folks and saying, your job is front-end customer service and you're the sole people who are responsible for that, we actually brought in a number of staff with front of house backgrounds, you know, receptionists and EAs and the like, and said, you're great with people, you're great at communicating, you know nothing about technology and our back-end processes.
That's fine. That's
exactly right. But what you do is you give a really positive customer experience. You talk to the customer in a way that actually shows, as you said earlier, empathy. And it's all about empathy. There is nothing better than having someone say, I'm really sorry that you are frustrated by your computer not working. And we get that it's our responsibility to fix it. And if you give us a bit of time, we'll make it right for you. And just kind of calming people down and being that, you know, being that empathetic ear for them when they're in what's probably a really stressful time for them. And so we actually created a number of roles for people to just sit at telephones and at email and just communicate with the customer and be that buffer between the technical folks and the front-end user. And that's had a significant impact on kind of that customer satisfaction space.
You may not realize it, but you have picked up and honed on some of the most pertinent customer support just values that exist. So you've done such an incredible job in a very short period of time without having a background in running contact centers or support organizations. So you are singing the song of most people who are listening today. Curious though, did you see your support interactions rise because of how easy you made it and how good you made it? And was that okay for you?
That's a yes and a no. So we found that in terms of parents and students, we had a fantastic uptake and customer satisfaction rose as well as the number of customer interactions. And that was fantastic. I think it made parents feel like that they had a valid channel to approach the college and get support. And they were using that, they were taking that up. I think where it didn't work so well was actually staff. And so we had staff who have worked and loved that really traditional model, coming back to our values of interpersonal engagement. They love being able to walk in and have a chat with a person at a service desk and say, look, my laptop's experiencing problems. Can you take a look and let's have a nice chat about your kids while we're here? And that's a really valuable exchange for our culture. But we were finding though, that because we'd forced everyone online during the first lockdown, people were saving up their problems. So staff weren't as ready to engage with us in many quarters because they didn't want to, because they were saving it up for the ability to go and have a chat to that staff member that they really love and they engage with so well. And so we didn't have a significant rise in the first 3 weeks that we'd had the lockdown. Staff were able to come back and within 24 hours, we just had this flood of requests of people coming in person saying, look, I've had this problem for the last 2 weeks, or I've had this problem for the last month, or my E and my G key have fallen off my laptop. You know, just these things that should have been really easily resolved prior. And they just wanted to have a chat about it and get that personal engagement. And so that's something we've had to work really hard to say, look, you can still have a chat. You can still have that personal engagement. We've just got a different way of doing that with you.
Well, we're getting quite a few questions now around metrics. And so I want to switch gears just a little bit and hit on that. One question from Katrina is, how do you measure customer satisfaction? And then we also have a couple of questions around, what is your average response time? And do you offer any guarantees for how quickly you'll get back to people? Which feeds right into customer satisfaction.
It does beautifully. In terms of metrics, it's great. I can show significant increases from the nothing that we were recording earlier to what we have now. That's been really
Something is
cool.
better than nothing.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly right. So I've hit my KPIs for the next couple of years. In terms of SLAs, that's actually been a really interesting journey for us to go on. And it's been a bit of an eye opener for me because I went, we don't have any SLAs. I think that I can sit down with our operations coordinator and some of our service desk folks, and we can come up with what should be reasonable SLAs very quickly. And so we went, we'll get back to you in 24 hours. We'll have your ticket resolved in 48. If it's non-urgent, we'll do 72-hour response times, etc. And things that we just thought were standard baselines. And the problem was that I just set about erroneously introducing that to people and saying, these are SLAs. Not understanding that the culture actually was, someone would make a phone call and say, I have a problem. Can you come and fix it immediately? And it doesn't matter if that was a problem with a back-end system or a server or a finance tool or a keyboard not working. The service desk folks and a lot of the level 2 people were so helpful that they would just drop everything what they were doing. They would rush off to the customer, typically in person, and help them. And so for me to then say, I think within 24 hours we can get this resolved, the people were up in arms that was considered to be reasonable because they'd gone from this level of immediacy that I'd never experienced before. And so we actually went through a couple of different rounds of SLAs and guarantees in terms of resolution. We immediately halved everything that I said. And even then that was a bit of a struggle to get people's head around. And so what we've found is we've got this really good balance now between that instinctive cultural aspect for the service desk folks, which is to drop and move. We've got a good balance between that and kind of what's more manageable and sustainable for us in the backlog. What we find is that typically people have that first level triage taking place within an hour during business hours. We find that if we haven't got to something within an hour, it'll get escalated pretty quickly by staff and we'll typically work to resolve that. And I'm sure most people listening can imagine that any service desk with a standard resolution time of an hour or less is fantastic. And most people would be very happy with this because, it's typically an hour at the outside. Right. People are getting resolutions in 5-10 minutes at the moment, typically. We find that our hardware response wasn't up to the satisfaction of a lot of people. And that was really interesting. And that was something we measured customer satisfaction simply by doing aftercare visits with people and actually talking them through their experiences. So instead of relying on a survey or some other arbitrary measure to measure CSAT, we're actually going out and kind of interviewing people and engaging with them. And we still do that. And we found that people weren't satisfied with the timing there. We were taking days to resolve. People were wanting hours. So we changed the model there. We started to...
It's so important to maintain that flexibility and to also understand the prioritization, because not all tickets are created equal. And some things you do have to get to, as your staff would have said, immediately versus that 24 hours, that 12 hours. Believe it or not, we're coming down to time, and I want to make sure we cover just a couple more things. One being, do you think that the education system needed this shakeup?
I do. I think that when you start to look at the sector, it is quite slow moving. It's worked in a certain way for literally hundreds of years, and it's worked quite well in its core purpose. And I think that looking at Xavier College, we've operated for 142 years really successfully. We're one of the largest schools of our type in Australia. But I found that kind of steering people towards incremental change was just not working and was a real struggle. This shift that's come along that's forced us to adopt change so rapidly, I think that's helped to build the momentum to a point that we just wouldn't have seen otherwise. And in the education sector, it's certainly shown me and a lot of other people that everything we thought about change management in the sector was wrong. We really thought that it would take 2 to 3 years to adopt new technologies and ways of working, and people just wouldn't adopt certain things. And we've realized that, we can make enormous changes within 48 hours when there's the real impetus to do so from an external force. And it's contrary to everything that we thought and everything that we all learned in business school. But in a really positive way. And it shows that, I think the sector is really, it's really ripe for change. And we can capitalize on this momentum that we've been getting the last couple of months in some really positive ways.
Last question for you. Before we go, is there any Zendesk tip or trick that you think has absolutely benefited either your faculty, your students, your parents, any of your customers?
So for me, it's the internal folks that have really benefited from some of these tips and tricks. So especially our first level support folks. And for us, that trick is the really easy integration between support and guide, and the ability for when you're sitting in a support ticket to use that machine learning, that AI that's sitting there to pull out the relevant articles from guide and present that to the staff. And we've found that really important. And then likewise, that ability for staff to take a ticket that they know is a repeated recurring problem and then build a knowledge-based article out of that very quickly. And that really smooth interaction between support and guides really helped us.
Well, thank you for that. And thank you again for having the foresight to implement Zendesk and the foresight to move to the cloud and to have this grand vision. Regardless of COVID-19, it certainly set you and the entire Xavier College on the right path. And that's it for today. I told you it was going to go quickly. I want to again thank Patrick for sharing your expertise with us. And thank you to everyone for sharing a moment with us. Please stay connected with Zendesk and the rest of our community. And we're going to be back here in Australia on September 3rd with Matt Jones, the co-founder of Four Pillars Gin. This time we're following our conversation with a gin tasting. So I will definitely be staying up late for that. And so with that, be safe, be helpful, and we'll chat again soon. Thank you so much.